afternoon, everyone. I'm Kelly Bergman, Operations and Vendor Relations Specialist, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you all to the Vracus BOM Computer Consulting User Conference. This actually marks our 15th year that we've been doing this, and we are so excited that we're able to continue to offer this to you, our clients. If you just joined us from our previous session, you're in luck. Kristen's back. Sales and consulting specialist extraordinaire, and she's here to show us how to leverage barcode scanning and how it can simplify your manufacturing data collection to give you true costs. Few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded. All attendees are on mute. If you have questions during the session, please enter them into either the Q&A session or the chat session. We'll be monitoring them both, and we'll answer all questions at the end. CPE credit is also being offered. You'll get a survey Friday, and there will be a little section on the bottom there. Just fill that out, and we'll be sure to get you a certificate in the next couple weeks. And with that, and Kristen's many years working directly with the software, we know you're in good hands with her. Kristen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you everyone who's joining us, especially if you're just joining us off of my other presentation. I know it's not something you're going to hear very often, but I appreciate you getting enough of Kristen right now. Today, we are changing gears. We just spent a lot of time focusing on a distribution process. We're actually going to go into manufacturing processes for this portion of our discussion. So with that being said, let's get started. First and foremost, thank you so much. Again, we're going to focus manufacturing. What do you need to know? And this is going to be the crux of our conversation today. When we talk about manufacturing processes, they are so varied and unique that everyone is basically creating their own needs. And there is not going to be a need. There are some universals true in all manufacturing. Get your product out the door to your customer. That's a pretty much universal need. But all of the nuances within how you manufacture, what you manufacture, is it service? Is it something that we are truly creating make to stock items, or is it a custom fabrication? No matter which vein you fall into, you need to really sit back and say to yourself, what do I need to understand about my process? What visibility is really going to help me? So with our agenda today, we are going to be focusing on a couple key areas. The first is addressing our data struggles. This is to kind of get our brains warmed up to go, all right, it's not something that's fun to talk about, but you need to start to understand what you as an organization, what you personally need to see in your data capture. Because unless we know what needs to be captured, it's hard to write a process that's going to give you all the information that you need. Then with our brains all warmed up, we're going to go into what's possible. So we're going to start to use our imaginations and scale into different types of scanning, different types of automation to get that information that's going to feed our data points. And ultimately, we're going to come back to what is your solution. And when I say that, it is not in a generic sense. It is specific for you, the individual listening to my voice right now. What do you need for your solution? This is critical, especially in the manufacturing vein. We can look at key metrics, we can look at standard logistics, but at the same time, there's going to be information in your process that is critical, and we are going to talk about helping to identify that. As Kelly mentioned, at the end of our session, we are going to have a Q&A, so please use those options, either the chat or Q&A box. You can enter as many questions as you like, and we'll get to those at the end of our presentation. So let's start off with our data struggle. I adore this quote. There's nothing simpler that I can say. This gentleman came up with the idea of without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And as someone who is extremely opinionated, anybody who knows me will testify to that. I also am big on data capture, because if you don't have the actual data to back up your perspectives, you're guessing. You're saying, I think the order is about here in the process. We should have enough materials. You don't want to have an opinion. You want to have those hard facts. And that's something that we understand as manufacturers. We need those hard facts, because when we don't have them and we try and make that educated, opinionated guess, That's where we can get into trouble. We end up getting backlogs. We know with the supply chain this year, everything has gotten a little wonky on that side. So knowing and truly knowing things helps us sleep at night. Now, I want to talk just a second about Mr. Deming, the gentleman who actually created this quote. Now, he was actually alive from 1900 to 1993, and he was pegged as an advisor, a consultant, an author. He used to work for the USDA, the Bureau of Census. He was actually a consultant to the US Secretary of War at the time. And the reason that this particular gentleman was so well renowned and was involved in so many, government-based calculations and statistical tracking was he was the largest proponent of statistical quality control. A lot of manufacturers on the call might have already heard of him because he has written out some pretty detailed books and just some general theories about the good practice of statistical data. Now, one of my favorite things that a lot of people don't know about Mr. Deming is that he was actually dabbling in amateur music composition. And I bring this up for one reason. He actually rewrote a version of the national anthem. And the reason he did it was he was trying to address a general person's inability to hit all the notes. If you've ever really listened to the national anthem, there's a lot of high notes in there that the average person is not going to hit. But I love that about him because it really stands as a metaphor for one of his points against management of manufacturing of any kind of process. It's don't blame the singers or what we call our employees or our workers on the floor if the song is written poorly, meaning that the system becomes our problem. He says, and I loved his addressment of this, which was instead rewrite the music. Fix the system. So with that analogy and building on Mr. Deming's example, we are going to work on defining our song and helping our singers be able to perform what we need from them. So getting into that, what do you need to know? This is how we start to build our song. Now, the system that you have in place right now, maybe not all your singers are actually hitting all of those notes, but the song structure in itself is still very, very important. The most common ones through the years that I've always heard is the visibility to not knowing when a job is actually going to be completed. Anyone that's going through manufacturing processes, this is usually a struggle. Now, some of us are unfortunately in the boat where we also have customers that are breathing down our necks with these kinds of questions, especially in today's world. Everybody wanted it yesterday, got to ship it overnight and get it out the door. When you can't answer a customer question to know where your job is in the process, to know when it will be completed, that is something that's going to handicap us. And it's usually going to be one of the critical concerns. Another one, and this is probably one of the most, in my opinion, difficult things to track is labor when we talk about tracking in our manufacturing processes. Most of us are familiar with the concept of using standardized or budgeted labor so we can front flush or back flush it, and we take our best guess. We try to determine what we think it's going to take to build a job. But again, going back to what Mr. Deming said, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So how can we get an accurate labor collection without guesstimates, without rounding, without, it should take about 4 hours for this part of the process? This feeds into kind of our additional buckets here. What do the job actually cost when we need actual materials, when we need actual labor costs? What is that really costing us as manufacturers? Did we have to scrap something? Did we have to issue 2 instead of 1 because we had a faulty part? Those are all of the type of costs that can really impact the bottom line and also help illustrate the song of where we need to get better in our processes. Very common as of late too is knowing what materials are in WIP. Now, I attribute a lot of this to the supply chain with all items kind of being backlogged. You're not too sure about our lead times, and some materials like aluminum and wood and concrete, everything is kind of becoming more difficult to get our hands on. Knowing what is truly in our work in progress versus we think we have it out on the shelf is going to become critical in those manufacturing processes. And we use it a lot of the time to steal from Peter to pay Paul. That idea of our big customers, the ones that are incredibly important to us, they might have higher priority type jobs that need to go out. And sometimes we need to steal from the little guys, or there are times our jobs might have substitute items that can be used on one project, but not another. Cuts of rebar, cuts of steel, cuts of wood, any materials that we use in a raw material sense, fabric, foam, rubber, any of those, sometimes we can use different widths or lengths, and we can actually take something from one job to complete both jobs at the same time. All of these data points, again, the more we can get into our song that we want our workers to actually sing for us, the better idea we'll actually get to what's truly happening on the floor with those data collection points. But this is a struggle, and it's important to at least acknowledge, what are you looking for in your process? Which of these situations really apply to you? So cast your minds out. We're going to go into what's possible. Now, I am going to be talking about different manufacturing solutions today, some of them in more detail than others. The first one we're going to start with is bill of materials automation. Now, most of us in our manufacturing experience are familiar with a BOM. We're familiar with what that bill of materials looks like. It is the true materials it takes for us to produce our item, whether that be a sub-assembly or a finished good. The struggle with bill of materials most of the time comes, depending on your manufacturing process, with when those materials are issued. There is no true sense of a work in progress with bill of materials. There's no time component. It's just materials. So whether that's labor or actually seeing when you've issued something, but it might take a day or two to build that subassembly, that WIP feel is kind of omitted with bill of materials to really understand where those materials are in processing. Now, with automation, one thing that is possible is, especially for those of you on the call that are tracking any lot or serial information with your raw material components, bill of materials and automation, this can be simplify your lives. If we're not doing an automation solution with bill of materials, 90% of the time, if not 95% of the time, somebody's writing it down on a piece of paper. They hand it into a supervisor, they sit down at a Sage terminal, they do bill of materials production entry, and then they're using that piece of paper to tell the system how much was issued and which lots and serials were being used. Some manufacturers will do a back flush or a front flush or an auto allocation of different lots and serials, but now you're also running the risk that maybe that wasn't accurate. Maybe they didn't actually pick the item that was in front, they grabbed the third one back. That's going to throw sometimes your lot and serials out. But this, again, this bill of materials production entry is what we're looking to automate. And there is integrations within the Sage universe, specifically with the Scanco multi-bin solution. So depending on how you're using, you can leverage some kind of WIP feel locations and bins and staging. So there's a little flexibility in bill of materials, but overall it's pretty limited. We are going to talk a little bit about production management. So for those of you who have heard the term production management, you're already familiar. This is Sage's replacement of the work order module as you migrate into higher versions of Sage. Work order right now is still around, but production management is going to be phasing it out as we go. When we talk about doing a PM track, and you're going to hear me do some abbreviations, BOM is bill of materials, PM is production management, OM will be operations management. For PM specifically, we do also have that ability to issue materials. We can, with automation, include the real-time lot and serial information. We're allowed to negative issue materials. That starts to happen when you actually have a true time bucket of work in progress. You may have issued materials to a job, but you can take them off the job if you overissued. Maybe you did a whole roll and you need to issue back some leftover footage, or something incorrectly got issued to that job. We're also now able to broach the route or the steps in the process. When PM is introduced, and even work order, you can start to see the steps and some time associations with how we go through this process. It also allows for make stock completions. There is a multi-bin integration. And we want to point out it's depending on the solution, because there are a couple of automation tools out there. Again, if you are interested in exploring this for PM, let us know. We can talk about those kinds of different options. But again, it's more robust than bill of materials. But at the same time, the automation, depending on what song you're looking to write, can really impact the data capture points in a PM process. Now, one of my favorites to talk about, operations management. As we know, Barcode BOM is known for our operations management. We are known for JobOps. That's what we do. It's what we live, sleep, eat, and breathe. When we talk about automation for operations management, we're talking about not only dynamic inventory capacities, which are available within PM as well, but a lot more robustness, especially when we get into step tracking. Those steps can help feed our insights. They can help feed Business Insight Explorer dashboards. They can help with the statuses and the work centers when we talk about scheduling. So we can really start to build into a more robust full form type of manufacturing solution if we're able to get this information as quickly as possible from the floor. So we're looking at labor tracking, status step tracking, make to stock completions. There is an integration with Scanco's multi-bin if you're doing actual location tracking at the same time. We covered that a little bit in our previous presentation. These are kind of what's possible. And again, with that imagination still in tow, I want you guys to kind of walk with me through some of these solutions to see what this type of automation truly looks like within your Sage 100 environment. So let's stop with PowerPoint. Let's get into some actual software. Now, the first one I did mention was the bill of materials production entry. And this really is important for those of us in manufacturing, because even more advanced manufacturing in PM or in OM, you will see a lot of the time a BOM utilization. If we are doing bill of materials production entries, one way that this can be automated and completed is actually in the Scanco Warehouse 100 solution. So this was a solution that we had just looked at a little bit, and we were doing mainly distribution processes. But in this solution, there's also a bill of materials production entry. Again, for those using BOM that are tracking lots or serials, this might be the way to help address those notes that you're looking to hit in your process. We're not writing anything down. We're capturing it in the moment. This can be done when we first start building our subassembly. This can be done at the back end. Again, BOM is not sensitive to the time of it, but you can easily capture this information in real time. So using a bill of materials production entry, I'm actually going to produce a bill. Now, we know it's getting close to Halloween, so a lot of what you're going to see is a Halloween theme, and I'm actually doing a deluxe Jack skeleton display. This consists of plastic buckets to hold our candy, creating cases and sending out the cases of candy for our display, and also having an animatronic Jack skeleton to be able to present to those kids for our candy collections. More information you probably want to know, but I'm a nut for Halloween. The first thing I'm going to identify is the quantity. We're going to keep it really simple for today, and we're just going to produce one of these BOM kits, these BOM finished good items of all of these items together. On the scanner, I do get my bill. I'm also confirming my description and my revision number. And then it's going to start asking me for my components. So in this case, I'm going to take some of those components I was mentioning. I have a bucket. Now, this bill requires that 12 of them get added for this display. So I'm going to go ahead and issue all 12 of them. The next component I have is some candy. Now, this represents a lotted item for us. So you can see I have my item. I have my unit of measure. Now I need to be bringing in and it's going to find that lot information. So I can do a lookup at this point. So if I use that magnifying glass at the top of this scanning device, I can use that lookup and look at my available lots. I currently have one on hand. I can identify that lot. I can say I have 5 that are required for this. I haven't collected any of them right now. So I'll issue all 5 for those 5 cases of candy that are going out to those happy kids. And I can also identify my serialized item, which is that large Jack skeleton. He's animatronic. He cost me a couple $100. I want to get it in my display, but he's a high value item to me. So I can issue that actual serial number as well. Just like before, I do have that lookup option where I can see my available serial numbers. If we have these items barcoded, the serial and the lot information can be a quick scan as well. So I'm going to grab one of my serialized items. As soon as I'm done building this BOM, just like you would manually be doing in Sage, but here I could scan my items out on the floor. I'm going to hit that send icon at the top of my device to reinforce what's going on here. In my Sage 100 environment, I have the Sage Mobility for Barcode module. This barcode module, as I'm doing this in real time, is capturing the information. When I hit send, it's prompting the data in the Mobility for Barcode module to send whatever transaction I'm working on into and create my Sage environment. So here, when I hit send, I'm actually going to be producing our bill of materials production entry. So do I want to submit the information? I'm going to go ahead and say yes. I get a success message on my handheld device. And without turning in any paperwork, I've actually created my bill of materials production entry. So we'll go into production entry. We'll look at the production numbers with today's date. Okay. I'm going to grab my Jack skeleton that I just created. And here on my lines, again, no manual entry here for those items that had serial information. My serial number is automatically in the system. For those that had the lot information, my lot information is already in the system. So this is a really nice, tidy way. If we were doing bill of materials productions, we could capture that more robust detail, giving us more key indicators, more notes, as it were, for our song. This is one way that we could accomplish that with automation. But this isn't the only solution that we have available. So I'm going to switch gears. Out on my handheld device, as I mentioned, I was using the Warehouse 100 application. Let's look at something that's going to directly tie into operations management. To do that, I'm actually switching apps. I am using an iPad mini to show you guys this. So all I'm doing is I'm force closing, and I'm going to switch from Warehouse 100 to my Manufacturing 100 application. This is going to allow me to now do those same types of transactions, but take it up a level as we talk about operations management. Now, as I mentioned, one of the things that we're going to see with a change from BOMs to any other manufacturing, work order, production management, operations management, is we're going to start to see the ability to track time increments within the system. That can be as complex as labor tracks or as simple as status changes to let us know when a step in the process is done. We're actually going to start, and we're going to start with our parts usage. Now, before we really get into this collection, I'm going to do a couple things, and it's going to be off of what we call a barcoded work ticket. So any of us who have used a manufacturing solution knows that our work ticket travelers can print. These are travelers, shop packets, however you want to use this. And this is a crystal form, so it is customizable. I do have my work ticket number up at the top here. What I want to show you is as I come down in my work ticket, we actually have barcodes that are going to represent on this example our work ticket number and our step, along with items that are barcoded. Now, again, this is one of those notes or one of those questions to ask. Does it make sense to have barcodes on a form for our items, or would we be labeling items so the employees could easily scan them? If we're doing heavy lot and serial tracking, I am a proponent of labeling the actual items if possible, because that is a super fast and accurate data capture for our processes. It is important to say that when we're barcoding the work ticket and step numbers, and we do utilize some paper in our process, this makes it so easy for employees. We're going to show a couple of examples of scanning the steps and doing lookups here. When we're doing this, this scan really does make it much easier for an employee to identify the actual item that they're working on and the ticket. This will simplify their lives if we can give them something to scan. Otherwise, they're going to have to identify it in another capacity. So kind of keep that in your mind as we go through the rest of our presentation here. So very first thing I'm going to do here, excuse me, is in operations management, I'm going to create a work ticket. So we're going to break something up brand new. I'm going to go into my sales order entry. And for any of you who have seen Joe Genders or any of the other Raucous team be able to present, you're going to realize that Kristen is all about the logistics of the physical inventory. So bear with me as I hammer around in operations management. I'm going to select a customer, and I'm going to add a work ticket class, and I'm going to do a make to stock here. So we're keeping examples simple. This is not a make to order process necessarily. We're just going to make something we make all the time. And it's actually going to be my my Jack Skeleton display, but we're going to look at it instead of from a BOM perspective as a work ticket perspective, just to kind of change the game a little bit. On my lines, first thing I need to do is I need to add that Jack Skeleton item. So here we go. Here's my animated figure, but I want my deluxe display. When I grab that item, I have the ability to create a work ticket here, or you could be creating your work tickets from Component Exception Manager. Again, there's flexibility in the process. I'm going to create one here because this is what we're going to work on instead of generating it out of SEM. And I'm going to say, you know what, again, simple example, we're going to order one of these for now. When I move off that line, because I do have a BOM and a template set up that matches this particular item number, it's going to ask if I want to create the work ticket from my template. I'll agree to that because that makes sense to me. And I'm just going to pull up this work ticket really quick. I'm not going to edit it, but I want to document our work ticket number. So we're actually going to be working on work ticket 1725001. That's going to play into our process as we go. A couple things I do want to point out. I do have materials and a couple points on these steps, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but again, flexibility over the bill of materials entry is that when I go to parts entry, I can see at different parts in my process where certain items are needed. If I have a long time span between those steps, this helps in my inventory planning because it doesn't mean I need everything at the same time, like bill of materials traditionally would. If I wanted to create something, I needed all of those materials there. This gives us flexibility on our ordering and when we actually need to pull and stage these particular items. I don't have anything captured to this. So you can see I've got no quantities used for any of it. I have no labor tracking in here. I have no status updates, except that my Sage user, who I'm logged in at, is going to be creating a brand new ticket, okay? So very vanilla ticket, very simple process, but we're gonna start to build out the notes, the details in our process to help give us those data capture points that are gonna make sense for our individual songs. So I'm going to close that work ticket. I'm going to close my eyeball to roll up those components. Here's my sales order. That work ticket number again is 1725-001 related to my sales order 1725. So we're going to accept all that. I'm going to close out a sales order entry and let's get into some actual data capture points now. First and foremost, we're going to start with parts usage. Now, we can look at this any way you want. And when it comes to your process, maybe the first thing you do is clock in on the job before you grab anything. Maybe you have somebody different doing the parts pulling than doing any of the labor or configuration. Again, it's going to be based on your templates and how your manufacturing process runs. But we're going to walk through examples of what these transactions look like. So using parts usage, this is where I'm going to issue those actual materials to the steps in my job. Now, in that work ticket, remember we did that barcoded ticket, right? And we showed you if we scanned that work ticket and step here, or we talked about this, that this would be a very easy thing for an employee to accomplish. If you've got a work ticket traveler, if you've got a packet out on the floor, and you end up saying, I'm scanning the step for my instructions for the materials I need to use, this becomes very easy for the employee. If we do a lookup, we're going to get a list of all open work orders. So that doesn't really help us either. But one cool thing that the software can do, and just to pare this down a bit, is remember I said, and I wrote it down, 1725 is going to be the work ticket we're looking at. If I enter some information into this field prompt and then do a lookup, it's actually going to give me a much shorter list. So it's not showing me every work ticket I have open, but it's going to show me specifically what I have access to with that work ticket number, again, -001. And these are all of my step numbers through the process. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to issue that Jack Skeleton. In my instructions, I need to grab him first, and we need to get him ramped up and ready to go before we add in our shipping stage, or our shipping and packaging, our buckets and our candy to that display. So I can be, again, scanning items that are directly in front of me. If I do that lookup, you can see for this step, the items that are needed. You can also see what's required, what's been issued so far, and what I have available in stock. So again, this dynamic, real tight integration into Sage 100, letting you know what you can do. These are data points that are not only helpful for the people on the floor, but the continued data points that are going to feed your system. So remember, I have a quantity available of 11 right now, but I need to issue 1 here. I'm going to use that lookup again to make sure that I have an available serial number, which I do. So I'm going to grab that serial number. And I have now effectively brought that material onto the job. Just like in bill of materials, in operations management, I have the option to use a send button. I slowed down and emphasized that because you actually can omit send buttons in these transactions, meaning that no one has to do this step where I hit send, I get my confirmation message and accept that. I can issue it directly into my work tickets. So what does that look like? Well, I'm going to go back into operations management. I'm going to go to my work ticket edit, and we're going to pull up that work ticket. So I will do a lookup here. You can see all of my available open work tickets, which is what we try not to have people scroll through. I'm going to grab that work ticket for my skeleton display, and I am going to go to my step 10, which is configuring those components, which is where Jack is truly labeled. In parts entry, you can see I have a quantity used of 1. When I pulled this ticket up before, I didn't have any items out there. I also, if I look at my distribution, have captured that actual serial number from the handheld device at the same time. Again, as an auditor by nature, I always like that double check. I want more information. Tell me who did this, Kristen. When I do dynamic inventory transactions and I look at that from the actual work ticket, I can start to see additional information as well, along with the transaction date, the reference number, the quantity used. So this will actually be a running total of what's going on in my work ticket. If I need to negative issue, or we need to forward issue, this will help me keep track of that. Because again, I've got a real simple one. You may have complex tickets where you have hundreds of lines within each step, or on a bill of materials step where you're issuing your materials. Again, it's the flexibility of the solution. I'm just showing you examples for how we can start to capture this information. So we now have items on that job. That's excellent. I want to point out, I don't have any labor on this ticket. So let's go ahead and start getting some labor on there. I'm going to close out of my work ticket, and I'm going to jump back out to that handheld device. We'll put that work ticket edit over there. Going back to the main screen, labor entry, again, this is one of the ideas that can be set to, you could have an employee actually entering true hours. So I think I worked 4 hours and you can capture that, but that doesn't give us accuracy. If we say we think it was about 3.5 hours, that's a great guess. But like Mr. Deming said, I don't want opinions, I want my data. So I'm going to identify myself to this work ticket. I'm going to scan my employee number. So there's me coming in. I'm officially on record. I'm also going to go to that work ticket. And remember, I don't have a barcode for this because I just created it for our presentation today. So I'm going to use that cheat and actually go into my configuration of components. I'm going to be the one who's working on Mr. Jack, getting them all set up and making sure that his animatronics are correct to go into the next step of our manufacturing process. When I've identified that ticket, the system recognizes that I am coming in. It's the only thing that I can do right now is to punch in on this job. So I'm going to use my little track in button up at the top here. And you never have to remember any button up here. This dot, dot, dot will always be a more menu, and you can see exactly what that definition is. And we're going to track in on that job. Now, as I'm going through, I'm working on things, I'm going to come back and do a punch out on this job. To do that, it is as simple as, again, identifying who I am, identifying that work ticket number and that step. So I will, again, fat finger, this is why Kristen scans things. You can see we are validating real time. My work ticket 1725 is not a valid work ticket. What I can do, though, is say 1725 into my prompt, and I can do a lookup to sort on that field. So again, it's one of those things that Kristen can fat finger sometimes. And as you can see, I going through this list, it takes a while to get to the bottom. So we're going to do an example here, and I will go into that same step. So again, that's what I kind of want to keep away from employees if at all possible. So I wanted to show you some of those shortcuts as well. Now, with changing this labor entry, because I'm coming out now, Depending on what we want to allow for, so again, those notes we want to capture, I can actually change some of these fields. One of them I can change is that status code. So I just tapped in that code. I don't want it to be at a new status anymore. I'm starting it. So I'm going to say, you know what? We're open and in production. I also can add a comment and I can say, hey, boss, I started. That's my comment for this job. It recognizes that I am now coming out of this labor track, and you can say a quantity completed, just to reinforce, this is not, and I repeat, this is not a make to stock completion. This is not adding finished goods to your inventory. This is one of those notes, and the subtle notes at that we can capture in this process. That question of, hey, how are we in the process? How many did I actually get through? Where are you as far as this job? If you have an order for 1,000 items, you can start to track a quantity completed in your actual labor entries to see as a status meter how well you're doing. Customer calls you and you can see that you've got half of it done. You might be able to give a better estimation of when that job's going to be completed. So here, let's say, for example, I started on it. I got through 30 of them, but it's in open, it's in production. I've entered my information. I'm going to use that track out button now. And to show us again what's happening, I'm going to go directly into my work ticket. So we're going to work ticket. We'll go to my jack skeleton. And this time, remember, we pointed out there was no labor there, but let's go back to that step. Now, when I look at my labor, you can see, oh, there's my date. There's me. There's the department I'm working on, how long I was working. And again, this is the information that I was bringing in the scanner. Changing an activity code is also one of those options that is possible. When I go to my status tab, this is where, when I changed it from a new ticket to open production, you can now see that information. I do want to point out in the who, I'm logged in on my scanning device as KB3 out on my device. This is reading the device as to who is doing this. And look at, there's that comment I just added. Hey, boss, I started. This is how, based on the data points, based on how we leverage the steps, based on what's important in steps, we can start to capture that information. Now, a couple other things I want to show you really quick, and I'm going to jump out of that work ticket again, is let's say we're not ready for actual labor capture. Let's say we're not quite there where we want to get our actual start and stop times. But Kristen, that labor or that status tracking, that looked like it could be helpful to show me what is going on in my steps. We can actually split that transaction apart and just do this as a labor track. So here in this situation, I'm my employee. I'm going to bring in my work ticket number 1725 and do my lookup. I can again go into that configuration. I was in an open status. Maybe I just need to change my status code. Maybe I don't need to do an actual track out. I'm not tracking labor, but maybe I have a problem. I want to put it into QA testing, or I had to repair something, scrap it. Perhaps I completed it. Let's do that. We're going to complete it here. This is just, again, not a make to stock completion. This is just updating that status code. I do also have the option, and these are all optional codes here, guys, so you can choose what employees do and do not do on the handheld. I can also choose to track a quantity completed in the status updates as well. So maybe I'm all done now. I got an additional 30 done of the components I was working with. I know that that's a bad example because we just had one jack skeleton, but the comment is, he's ready to go. So this time when I hit my enter, I do want to point out my status updates in my demo environment. I don't have to hit a send button. I don't have to hit a track in or a track out. That status update happened because of the way I set it in real time. So all of those transactions can be that way, where we don't have to actually ask the user to do anything else from the handheld. Back into the work ticket, if I go down into my jack skeleton display, I'm going to go and grab that status change just to show you guys coming through. Again, I can now see by my steps, and please notice this is also rolling up to my main tab on my work ticket. I can see that comment and that status code. Again, status, here we go, completed, he's ready to go. This is a great communication tool for that main question. Like I said, I hear so much about how to know where your jobs are in the process without actually having to walk through the floor. It's all a matter of a marriage of the software, the logistics of your process, and what we're asking employees to do. So people, systems, software. That's how we write a strong song. And we can actually make it so all of those employees can hit the notes that we're really focused on. One more thing I'm just going to point out, because I know we're kind of running out of time. We do have make to stock completions as well for manufacturing 100, specifically for operations management. This is a great tool for subassemblies. This will create that actual completion, make to stock completion from the floor. This is a great way to manage subs in your process, so then they're automatically issued up to your parent finished items. If you're doing a true make to order process, again, make to stock is only when it's hitting your inventory levels as opposed to shipping it out. So depending on your process, depending on your needs, really you need to focus on what kind of song do you need to build and how these types of solutions really can enable employees to hit all those notes in our process. With that being said, I'm going to reinforce one more time, guys, it's a pleasure talking to you, but it's all about you. What is the information you need? I've dealt with a lot of customers through the years, and all needs have been different. All things are more important than others. This data drives your decisions, how you adjust on the floor. Again, with operations management, can play into scheduling, SEM, or ordering processes. These integrated solutions, you leverage your Sage 100 ERP system, get your real-time information, and again, focus that on those notes that you want to hit in your presentation, in your manufacturing presentations, and how you perceive yourself to your customers. All right, Kelly, that's my spiel. I'm sticking to it. I want to make sure that if we had any questions come in, we left a little bit of time. I'm a talker. I'm sorry, guys. We're almost out of time, but I will answer everything that you gave me.
You actually still have 15 minutes, Kristen.
Excellent.
So we're doing really
That's
well.
right. We started 15 minutes late. My apologies, everybody. Now I definitely have time for all the questions. Hit me up.
All right, first question. Would you clarify that you're now scanning an entry? And this came in kind of in the middle somewhere. It's hard to tell how you're populating some of the fields.
Sure. So I'm always a big believer in proof is in the pudding. Everybody, this is my iPad mini that I was just presenting on, that I was airplaying to my screen. This iPad mini actually is an integrated scanning sled. So anytime you saw or heard a beep in the background, I was actually pushing a button in the bottom of my scanning sled and actually scanning barcodes that I put on a barcode form. So this could be in your work ticket, these could be on your items, but anytime you saw a field populate with information and you were hearing a beep or you weren't seeing me type anything or do a lookup, I was scanning in it. In those lookup menus, you can also select from those menus as well. So hopefully that answers your question. Sorry, I should have clarified that when I was going through the presentation a little bit more.
Does operations management do item-based work tickets?
Operations management for item-based work tickets. I would need a little bit more clarification on that. If you're talking about operations management creating a make to stock based work ticket, absolutely that's possible. Item-based work tickets as opposed to how it's set up in the system, that's something I'd want a little bit more details on. And if I couldn't answer it, because as I mentioned in the beginning, Joe Genders is the man when it comes to operations management, that's something we could definitely get an answer for you for. So if you want to send us a little bit more information, I will be happy to get that addressed for you.
By handheld, obviously it can be an iPad, you just showed that. Are there other options?
A great question as well. When it comes to scanning, and I'm going to point this out in a couple different ways, what I have a tendency to gravitate towards is a mobile solution when we think about scanning. But in manufacturing processes, that actually changes a little bit. The material issues, when we have a material handler, we'll see them be in a mobile capacity. They're going to be going down aisles, they're going to be grabbing materials, but they may just be staging them. Depending on your process, a mobile device can work great. Sometimes it makes more sense to have a fixed point terminal. Think of your manufacturing process. If you have a line and everything comes to the end of a line where something's packaged, maybe that's a make stock completion, maybe that's where we're going to finish this line before we go to another step in our work ticket. Having a terminal at the end of that line that's fixed point, that isn't a mobile device running around, that's a great way to handle that. That can be what's called a scanning wedge. It's a USB corded, just plugs into your PC, and you can scan the barcodes in that capacity as well. You can utilize that with a solution like I've said, like I showed you. You can also utilize it scanning directly into Sage. The handhelds give a little bit more ease of use, so you're not looking at Sage screens. It also gives you validation prompts and limits what employees can and can't do. It can be easier, but there's a lot of options when it comes to hardware. Another great device that we're going to see a lot of the time is an Android-based device that's referred to as the TC71. It's made by Zebra. That type of device is a very nice price point. Those devices are very rugged. And whether you're on iOS, like I was showing, or an Android-based device, the application runs exactly the same way. It's just how you load it. When you first load up that screen, it's knowing how, your preference over your Android phone versus your iPhone, right? There's different ways that the screens behave, but the app itself will run the same way. So great question. There's actually a ton of hardware options out there, and it kind of depends on the logistical need that you need to meet.
All right, going back to the operations management question, we had a little clarification. Item-based work tickets as defined in JobOps. Does that help?
Actually, I know exactly what you're talking about. So I hate to ask this, but Kelly, can you repeat the first part of that question again?
Absolutely.
Now that I know what item-based we're looking at.
Does operations management do item-based work tickets?
To my understanding, it does. It just depends on how it's set up. Now, to be completely candid, as I've mentioned, I am not the expert here. So Joe Genders might be in the background yelling at me at this moment in time. That is something that I do a lot with production management, operations management. I would want to dig into my system. So Kelly, if you can note who asked that question, I will get absolute confirmation after I dig in and make sure, because I'd rather give you the right answer than what my best guess would be.
Well, Joe is answering right now, and his answer is YES, yes. And he is covering those on his session on Thursday at 8 a.m. So I hope you're signed up for that. You'll get a couple of those and much, much more, I'm sure.
Thank you, Joe. Big shout out for listening to the presentation. And yes, for anybody that is interested in more in-depth and capabilities of the operations management solution, please join us and Joe. He's been telling me a little bit about what he's cooking up, and I'm excited to see that presentation as well.
All right, let's get into some more questions here. What mobile operating system and versions are supported by the Warehouse 100 and Manufacturing 100 applications?
Great question. So Scanco's application, which again, what I was showing were all of the Scanco-based solutions. Scanco's particular application, and I'm going to cheat and look it up here. It is Android and iOS compatible along with Windows compatible. So when we look at which operating systems, usually Android is going to be the tricky one. The operating system that's currently supported, and I hate to say this out loud, is Lollipop going forward. So anybody who was on Android knows that Android named for different things, and they're embarrassing to say. So Lollipop, Marshmallow, Nougat, Oreo, Pie, those are all supported along with Android 10 and Android 11. On the iOS side, I don't know off the top of my head what the current version cutoff is, but if you do have updated, right now I'm running on a pretty old iPad mini. So as long as you keep your iOS versions upgraded to the current standards, I would need to do some research for the direct cutoff of what the Apple cap is. The other thing I want to say is that one thing I can 100% confirm is that with iOS platforms, there are certain devices that are going to be recommended because of their speed. When we're looking at iOS, we can see a lag if we don't have enough gigs, if it's something that runs a little bit slower or is on an outdated platform. The other thing I also want to point out is that most times to get a device that is an iOS device and a ruggedized scanning sled, because we do want to see a scanner associated with it, iOS may not always be the best option. If you have iPhones or iPads and you want to repurpose them, that's a great way to go. But it's actually less expensive to get an all-in-one sealed device if it's Android. iOS won't build devices that have scanners built into them like that. So you have to have the iOS device and a scanning sled and then attach the two. Android, it's all in one. They're sealed, very little dust, moisture gets in the devices. Apple can be a little tricky. So again, depending on your options, there are options out there. And I'm always a big fan of repurposing hardware if we can, but I'll need to double check on what that cutoff is exactly for the iOS versions.
Next question. Does this work with JobOps, and does it work well with JobOps?
So with JobOps, we're going to talk a little bit about which version you're on. Number one, if you're on an unsupported version, which is usually where we see the naming structure of JobOps still come into play. And when I say unsupported, that's by Sage. Sage supports this year and 2 years back. Usually we're going to see at that kind of 2019 mark, anybody that's in the Sage 2019, the naming structure is changed to Sage 100 Manufacturing or Operations Management at that point. JobOps itself, depending on your version, does have available scanning versions. It could be a legacy product, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend a legacy product if you knew you were going to be upgrading your Sage environment. So longest way in the world to say yes, there are scanning options available for JobOps. We'd want to look and see what version you're on and what your plans are for your Sage version as well.
Excellent. And I think a couple of these we answered here. Do you have to use Apple hardware, or can you use Android? Windows handheld?
Both are completely possible. For a Windows handheld, again, the biggest trick in doing Windows handhelds is finding something with an integrated scanner, okay? One thing that, again, my experience working at Scanco and with Scanco for a number of years, is that scanning engine, so whatever is powering the actual scanner portion of the device, is just as important as the operating system. So translate that down. We know the systems, Android, iOS, Windows, all completely supported. The scanner is also important, and there are different types of scanning engines that take in the data that it reads and translates it to the applications. Scanco actually has a list of recommended devices. You really won't go wrong if you stay within a Zebra family. However, a lot of us have had hardware in the past, or maybe we want to repurpose something that we used to have. That's a great scenario where we can test and load on it and see if it's possible. But Scanco does have recommended devices. I often am going to advise customers to use those recommended devices because if nothing else, the Scanco support team is able to help troubleshoot those particular ones. Off the top of my head, we're looking at Zebra TC21s, like I mentioned. There's a TC72 that's great for a more rugged. There are also versions of the TC family that can vary based on scanning distance as well. So I hope that answers that question.
I think that answers this question. Do you have a suggestion for a bad, dirty, and physically harsh environment?
Ooh, I love bad, dirty, and physically harsh environments. First question I have back is, can I come for an on-site? Those are my favorite kinds of places to be in. Now, dirt, grime, grit, sawdust, stone cutting work. These are all concerns when it comes to hardware. PCs can be hard to put on the floor because unless you really have them sealed and they're a solid state drive, you're going to get gum ups with your hardware. Truly, their devices are what we're going to look at in referring to an IP sealing rating. Really geeky technical term. It's just an IP rating is how well a device can keep out dust and moisture. For something that is super grimy, something that is super dusty, the particulates are going to be huge. You're going to be looking for the max cap, which is an IP rating of 6. The second number is the moisture rating. Most environments that I've been in will do absolutely amazing with what is referred to as an IP67. The 67 rating is the top of the line rating for dust particulates and second highest when it comes to water resistance. There is an IP68, the 68 and the 67, the difference between them. If you got a 67, you can shower with the device. If you got a 68, you can take a bath with it. So most people don't need quite that level where you're going underwater with a device for an extended period of time. But the Zebra family does a great job with that. The TC21 is actually rated to an IP67, and they do have another popular question. We'll get ahead of it in case it's there. they actually, for most customers I work with, they have a change of life between a 4 and 5 year mark, which means that, again, they are ruggedized. They're made to work on the floor. They are made for manufacturing and distribution environments, but no hardware lasts forever. They actually have a really nice turn rate. So instead of having to replace a device every 6 months, you actually get about 4 or 5 years of life out of it. And again, it just depends on your environment. So invite me for that on-site. Dusty, dirty, grimy, I love it.
How about any Chrome OS tablet support?
Chrome is not a supported version. So iOS, Android, Windows right now, there is no plans as far as I know for a Chrome supported version.
All right. And we had what other devices work well other than the iPad mini?
We've gone through a lot of different options, Again, there are accessories and you can get crazy and you can do pistol grips. Everybody remembers the old school Intermex with the big external keyboards and they were really heavy. There's a whole bunch of varieties out there. I would recommend having a conversation with myself, someone else on the Brockus team, to find out what specifically you're looking to accomplish. We can make recommendations as to the weight of the device, the durability of the device, what you're going to need for the range scanning, all that kind of stuff. And we can kind of point you to the right directions that way.
All right. What is the application that you're using on the handheld?
I was actually using 2 of them. When I was showing the bill of materials production entry, that is referred to Scanco Warehouse 100. Bill of materials is a lighter version, so it did not have its own associated module necessarily, like manufacturing 100. The version I showed was specifically linked to operations management, just to get things totally confused. Scanco does offer a manufacturing 100 for both operations management and production management. They are called the same thing, but they attach to different types of environments. So I was using 2, bill of materials production entry and manufacturing 100, warehouse 100 for bill of materials production entry and manufacturing 100 directly tied to operations management.
Next question. Do you know if scanning application will work with the new Windows 11 integration?
I haven't. That is a really, really great question. And I know that that's concern in the Sage community at large. Sage is supposed to be going through testing as far as Windows 11 compatibility, making sure we're not going to have any issues when that rolls. I have not heard a yay or nay from Scanco on that compatibility. The nice thing is that I actually have a demo environment. So that is one of my first tests, is to put it through its paces on a Windows 11 once I have a system that's upgraded to that. So I can confirm that as soon as we get that rollout. I can also check with Scanco to see what they're going to say on that, because I don't know if they've tested yet either.
All right. Did you need to scan in your user ID? And if so, do you see using employee barcode ID cards or suggestions?
So there is a lookup that's available when you're looking up employee IDs. A lot of people get a little uncomfortable with that because we don't necessarily want the, buddy punch system. I think everybody's kind of gone through that at some capacity. Hey man, I'm running late, get me in on this job, or I forgot to do it. We can have lookups, but we can disable those, meaning that you have to scan something, or you can do a lookup. Again, it depends on your particular process and needs. There is no special need for name badges or barcoding or having them put correctly on there. The best way that I can explain it is that that number that I was scanning that represented me in the system is actually in the employee maintenance within operations management. That's what allowed me to use that number into the system. That's a lot of setup on your operations management side. I literally went to a website and took my employee number and just put that website on there and had it return it into a barcode for me. You can do the same exact thing if you had, a lot of companies have security badges, maybe access to different rooms or an entrance key card. I've worked with a lot of customers that they use, laser jet labels. They print out the information that they need, they test it, make sure that it's barcoded correctly, and then they'll just stick that onto an employee badge or a station. Sometimes we may not want the lookup for the buddy punch, but maybe if we're doing a fixed point terminal, we actually have those employee numbers or a sheet there that they can scan off of. There is also in some of the transactions the ability to omit actually tracking the employee. Labor is not one of them. If you're going to track labor, we want to know which employee it is, or if that employee is on a crew. You can also track labor for crews as well. But if you were doing parts usage or you're doing status tracking, that's not necessarily something that we need to capture that employee scan for. So I hate to say it, it's a lot of flexibility, and it's really understanding what you need the system to do, and we can work to set it up that way.
Okay, is scanning available for all Sage manufacturing modules?
At this time, yes, automation is still available for all modules. So that's going to include if you're doing, and I'm going to run the full gamut of possible manufacturing modules. If you are doing material issues that are not actually dedicated to operations management, PM management, anything like that, you can just do material issues out of your system to consume raw materials. That's the basic level of manufacturing processes. Bill of materials production entry might be the next step up. We saw automation for that. Work order is still around. There are still associated scanning depending on the version of work order you're on. I want to be clear about that. Work order continues to be released by Sage. ScanCo is back a few versions, but there is a legacy product called WO Scan for work order scan that is still around and is still available. If you're on a lower version of JobOps, meaning you're not supported on the Sage side of it, JO Scan is available for JobOps scanning. If we're in the upper versions of either PM, moving off of work order, or operations management, there's also manufacturing 100. So kind of runs the gamut. It's really about what you're using and what your future goals are. Again, it's writing that song to make sure that you're hitting all the notes that you need collected and making sure you have the right module that meets that for you.
It's a good thing you didn't run over on your
I know, I'm sorry.
No, are specific barcode format specs required? Some vendors use different formats, or must everything be relabeled to one format?
Another great question. So there's actually a profile setting on all hardware that's referred to as usually a data wedge. The data wedge in the scanning engine is actually telling the scanner what types of barcodes it can be picking up. So if you're using a code 39 versus somebody who's doing something like a UCC coding or a UPC coding, you can start to dictate to the scanner what types of formats are going to come in. The one thing I do want to emphasize is that if you're looking at someone that's using a 2D barcode from one of your vendors, which are the little square boxes that we scan, the 2D barcodes are referred to as compounds, which means it has more than one piece of information in it. Not all the time, but it is highly likely. There's no regulation on that information. So 2D barcodes, I'm going to caution customers away from, because that means we need to work on ScanCo parsing barcodes. And that's a complex conversation with customizations. Customizations are never the way I like to go. The 1D, so stuff that looks like a picket fence, does not have to be universal. You can have it set up any way that you'd like to. There's quite a multitude of different ones that you can use. I'm always a big proof is in the pudding. Using a vendor barcode, scanning that barcode, seeing what information comes out of it is a great way to know how to use those parts, use those aliases in your system, and have that vendor do a lot of that labeling, heavy lifting for you as well.
Can I use just one function like status tracking?
It's another good question. All of the controls that I showed and I talked a lot about, you can allow employees to do it this way, or you can take out the employee number, or I can auto send this without having to hit send. That's all controlled in the ScanCo portal, including the transactions. So if you were someone that, again, you're not ready for labor tracking, actual capturing hours, and maybe you don't have any ladder serials, so you're front flushing or back flushing your parts, but you're dying for progress reports on your actual jobs, you can use just status tracking. You can shut down all other functionality on the device so they can't even get into it. And you can use whatever functions make sense for you, and you have ultimate control over that. That can also be set up by individual employees, meaning if you had someone who was a material handler, you give them access to parts usage. You have somebody that's only doing make stock completions at the other end of the line, that's all they can have access to. You get to determine how that's set up.
And the last question I see here is, who can help me with barcoding my forms?
that would be the Baracus team. If you guys need anything when it comes to any of your manufacturing modules, adding barcodes, because it is just changing a crystal form. It's changing it from a human readable into what's called Azalea B font. And when your report prints, it now has it as a nice little barcode for you in the correct formats. Ask us, reach out to the team. We're more than happy to help.
Giving
All right,
everybody
that
a
was
second here.
Those were great questions, guys. I don't think I've ever gotten so many in a presentation. So thank you for being engaged with me.
And finally, I'd like to thank Kristen for 2 excellent sessions today, walking us through manufacturing scanning, and a huge thank you to you, our attendees, for taking time out of your day to join us for our annual user conference. Lastly, this conference could not be possible without our valued business partners that sponsor this event. Make sure to take a look at our business partner hall. It should be up on our website pretty shortly here, v-bcc.com. And again, thanks for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
Everyone really appreciate it. Enjoy your day. Thanks for your time. And thank you, Kelly.
Anytime. Good